All right, welcome everybody to Getting Transparent. Last episode, if you missed it, we were excited to have the Hemp Industry Association Executive Director Jody McGinnis join us, who shared some great insights on the history of hemp, some of the future of hemp, and what the current CBD market is looking like, and the impact of the FDA and some of their rulings on hemp and the CBD market, and really what it can do for us. If you've missed it, go check it out. Today, really excited. We've got amazing guests covering a really important topic that's going to impact the majority of our food supply chain. We're going to talk about the FDA's new era of smarter food safety initiative, tech traceability, exactly what that means, what it is, and the FDA's recent traceability challenge, and ultimately, what's the future of our food safety, and food provenance looks like. So let's meet our guests. So our first guest is our first returning guest, Mark Carter. Mark's a longtime executive and leader in the food and beverage industry with extensive technical, scientific, and operations experience. Mark's considered one of the premier experts on food safety, technology, innovation, and taking products to market. He's currently serving at Hygiena along with his own company, MC Squared. Gives back a lot to the community with Lace It Up Sports, and also serves as the current secretary at the International Association of Food Protection. Mark, good to see you, buddy.
Hey, how you doing, Joe? Thanks for having me.
Anytime. And also is my colleague and the founder and CTO of TagOne, Manish Gupta. Manish was a senior consultant and executive at SAP who helped lead tech traceability at the division there. Worked a lot with pharmaceutical companies and leading them through serialization and traceability. After leaving SAP, Manish teamed up with TJ Gupta and formed Dreamweaver and ultimately TagOne, which is a traceability management system using blockchain technology to help streamline operations and supply chain for food and supplement companies. Manish, always good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, good to see you, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So, all right. When you guys first saw the FDA's new era of smarter food safety come out, if my memory serves me correct, a little over a year ago, like what were your thoughts on the proposal? Did you feel like it was the right time, the right proposal? What was your initial instinct? Mark, we'll start with you.
So I thought it was past time,
Mm-hmm.
let alone being the right time. It's past time for it. Just because you know, if anything, the idea of or the process of tracing food through our food systems, it gets more complex. Doing that by paper, doing it by spreadsheet is just it's the time is long past for that to be the way that it's done.
Sure.
So, for FDA to say there's an emphasis on doing this and doing it digitally and supporting electronic systems to increase traceability, help add to the level of food safety, we see, I think it's just past time, let alone being in time. It's past time for it.
And so, Manish, you experienced something kind of similar when you were at SAP. You helped with traceability and serialization through the pharma process. What parallels do you see between what's happening now in the food sector and what's happening and what happened in the pharmaceutical sector? And what can food companies expect?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, Joe. When we look at the proposed requirement for tech-enabled traceability, it is important to check if something similar has been done in any other industry sector. Interestingly, pharma has been working on end-to-end traceability for finished prescription drugs for quite some time. There were initially some proposed rules from state of California and some other states way back in 2000 for end-to-end traceability for the finished drugs. And then in November 2013, Congress enacted the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, normally referred to as DSCSA, to facilitate the tracing of certain prescription drugs in finished dosage throughout the pharmaceutical distribution supply chain. Implementation of these rules were intended to enable FDA and the enforcing agency to better protect consumers and better able to detect and remove such drugs from the US supply chain, pharmaceutical supply chain. So as you can see, these rules were there are differences in the intent for this law. In pharmaceutical case, it was about ensuring the supply chain to be safe, while in the new era of smarter food, it is about food safety. But at a high level, both involve end-to-end traceability across the supply chain, which is where we can get a lot of learning from the work which has already been done in the pharma sector. Now, if you look at pharma sector, they have been working for quite some time. And I would say a lot of effort in pharma was spent around ensuring interoperability where industry groups such as along with the FDA and standard organizations like GS1 worked tirelessly to come up with interoperable standards, which
Yep.
helped technology providers and companies implementing these technologies to meet these requirements using agreed standards. This involved all the participants to work very closely to achieve this, even though on the ground, most of them were fierce competitors. They were solution providers which could hardly talk eye to eye. Similarly, a lot of these pharma companies who can understand are fierce competitors. But in this space, all of them agreed that they need to work together in order to achieve something like this. And I would say we absolutely believe that something similar needs to happen in the food sector, where
Yep.
companies and solution providers across the industry need to collaborate and create shared value for everyone.
You know, I want to come back to that interoperability question because I think that's going to be really important. Um, you know, Mark, starting with you, as different companies and industries within the food industry, whether it's seafood or produce or, um, you know, one of the many other or meat sectors, look at the proposal, you're going to get a completely different responses. Some people may say it's not enough, or I've been doing this for years, it's about time, and others may say this is too much. You know, we're working fine the way it is. There's really not that many issues, or we don't have the resources. Our margins are too tight. Did you feel that the proposal was reasonable and kind of a good starting point? Is there anything that you would change or not change with the recommendation? What were your thoughts?
I mean, for me, one of the things I think is most important about that is, you know, just the proposal itself. I thought was well written, fair, asking for things. I think that again, when you see them in action in other industries, then the idea of saying, you know, hey, you know, we can't do it, kind of gets pushed and stressed a little bit. I think it's always going to be a thing where there's a spectrum, right, of capabilities in different companies. But I think the biggest thing that we looked at, that we look at, and one of the things I say is like, because the food industry can be so vertical that the requirements in each one of those vertical spaces can be I'm not going to say it's different, but the way things are communicated in a matter of like, how do you describe a product? You know, what do you expect to see from the things that are there to make it traceable? When you talk about interoperability, I think that's where the food industry probably is just getting to the point that they can handle the idea of coming from one part of the industry over to another.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And Manish, on the interoperability side, what did you guys experience with companies coming together? You know, GS1 has certainly been at the center of the new era of smarter food safety and tech traceability and trying to develop some standards there. What were some things you saw previously on the pharma side? What do you anticipate, and how can so-called competitors with traceability solutions work together to create some level of interoperability?
Yeah, so as I said, interoperability is very, very key to the success of this. So if you see, in our view, one of the keys to successful implementation of the proposed rule in our food supply chain will be how open we keep our ecosystem open. We are talking about around 500,000 of small and medium entities just for these 10 products which are there in the food traceability list. And each of these entities should have the option to choose their own solution to meet the proposed regulation without compromising on the sanctity of the data. And for an open ecosystem where multiple solutions coexist, we need to have standards for data storage and data sharing. For such a large ecosystem, having like one or two companies supporting it is no way going to sustain this. So this is where, again, I reemphasize the model, which was basically, I think, very successfully followed in the pharma. I reemphasize the importance of industry and solution providers to work together along with FDA to come up with these interoperable standards. And this is where bodies like GS1 will have a very key role, because in the end, they are the ones who will be the ones publishing the standards and others to accept it. Without interoperability, I strongly think there's no way to achieve a cost-effective traceability solution and high industry adoption.
And so just to piggyback on that, kind of like talking about tech traceability and really what that means, it's an important part The number one item listed in the new era of smarter food safety. What would you guys see as just operationally for a company that maybe doesn't have, maybe they're using spreadsheets or an accounting system or ERP? What are the kind of challenges will a company expect to see by shifting and implementing a traceability management system? And how can somebody? What are the first steps somebody should do if they want to integrate something?
Should
Mark,
I
we'll start with
answer?
you. Or go
Okay.
ahead, Manish. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I'll let Mark speak. He's our expert.
I personally think one of the biggest challenges is goes back to the layer of standardization to be able to communicate across the industry, right? And what does that mean? So one of the biggest challenges is when you talk about data integrity, and I say standardization helps with the level of data integrity you need to really go to a high level of traceability. So let's say there's no standardized way right now to even say, oh, this is, because it's not between companies, but I'll use an example. How do I designate a lot number for any given product that I have in my system? And can I communicate that and other people understand it? Well, people say, okay, you can use a Julian date, or you can use, month, date, year, you can get whatever you decide to do. Now, if there's no standardization of the way that we communicate data across different areas, right? I can send a product to a contract laboratory. I've got all kinds of things that I can recognize, but if I want to put that out into an open system, or have it such that I can link suppliers together and really trace things, then those things need that, that's a big hurdle we have in the industry right now, is like, how do we account for all these things that are not common? So to me, you've got to have a way to standardize. How do we begin to name the items that need to be traced?
Mm-hmm.
Then the system works, right? And then you can really start building the system. And I do believe, though, by having some flexibility with some of the electronic data systems that are there, being able to say, hey, these two fields are basically the same thing coming out of your LIMS system, coming out of your ERP, you can at least standardize data structure, if that makes sense, right? And I think once you can at least standardize data structure, then you can start standardizing the things that are inside those common areas and common fields. And that'll help with that interoperability we're talking about.
Absolutely. Manish, what do you think?
Yeah, I echo exactly what Mark said. So interoperability is just not about agreeing to a standard data model or how we are going to share the data with each other, but it also involves a lot of other things in terms of master data, which we're talking about, how to define items, how to universally basically recognize that items across the supply chain, how to recognize a location universally and uniquely across the supply chain. So I'm looking for a lot of work as and guidance coming out both as a part of the industry groups and maybe from FDA in terms of all this, because in the end, everyone needs to talk the same language. And for that to happen, there should be basically a universally accepted standards for master data, for data model, for sharing the data. And so interoperability is a much broader terms, which encompasses, I would say, all of these things.
I would even add something else that I think is just a challenge internally for enterprises or companies of any size, which is just change. Companies have done things for a long way and they've done it on spreadsheets to suddenly say, well, now we're going to change how we do this. And Sally or Bob or whoever has been doing it the same way. And anytime you go through a significant change, it requires more resources, more time, more organization, and cleaning up what's been happening in the past for the last 5 to 50 years. And oftentimes these tight margin industries don't have the resources in order to get that cleaned up and make that change. And there's just resistance from the top, from the bottom up. And if you don't have a strong enough leadership force, say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to allocate resources, bring in somebody from the outside to help us with this, or you're going to put in some extra time, extra hours, and here's our end goal, it can just get delayed forever until people throw their hands up and say, it can't be done. We know that difficult things can be done. We put men on the moon before and are seeing some amazing technologies, but I think that change management component is what's going to, why value driven organizations are the ones who are executing it, and those who are saying like, commodity driven organizations are struggling. I think is probably going to be one of the biggest issues. And I've heard that too, which is like, oh, we want to have item level traceability. Well, have you thought about, where you can change your current process? We're not willing to do that. Well, if you're not willing to change, you're not going to get change.
Yeah.
You can't, it's not magic, you can't have something that's just suddenly at no, no skin off your back, have something that's gonna be better. It's not going to cost you anything. And life is suddenly good. Just that's not how life works,
Yeah. Joe, that follows one of my favorite phrases though that I've used pretty much my whole career is that no one likes change but a wet baby. And you get to the point that you need to be able to manage that change. And maybe that's an opportunity, right? Maybe that whole change management side of it, from a service standpoint, becomes something that, hey, okay, you guys don't have to do it. We'll help you do this. Mm-hmm. And then the overall value back to the company is once the change is made, the level of efficiency and the other things you can see from the new system become quantifiable. Yep. Right. And the value of managing that change and somewhat managing it quickly puts even greater impetus to get it done. Right. If there's a way to say, hey, once this is done, look at the things you don't have to do. Look at the errors that are not made. Right. Transcription errors, all these other things like that. And then the next thing you know, right, things start to run more smoothly. Right. Mm-hmm. And that to me is part of, it's probably one of the hardest things, as you just mentioned, is the change management portion. Sometimes dealing with people's feeling of obsolescence, people's insecurity,
fear.
Again, fear. We're still, it's part of, like we always talk about food safety culture, for instance, but we're still talking about, change makes people uncomfortable, right? And I think managing that, you brought it, it's a great point, and embracing the fact that not only is this gonna, the change is gonna help you, it's gonna make your life better in the long run. Yeah. And the benefit to the food industry is massive. Yep. And the final consumer that's gonna now has, a much better, we have a much better way of putting a safe meal on a table than we did before, So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, you jumped on an area that that we talk about is like, what are the benefits, right? So I think many companies immediately say like, this is a burden. It's going to take time and resources. Manish, what do you see as some of the other, it's not just a burden, and it's not just because the FDA is telling you to, right? So when our parents tell us, hey, you got to clean your room, and you just feel like it's a burden, you're like, oh, there's something I need to do. But in fact, when you suddenly need to find something, or you want to have a friend over, Manish, what do you see as, what are the benefits that people should recognize they're going to receive by implementing a traceability management system?
Yeah, sure, Joe. So first of all, if what we propose to FDA as a part of the traceability challenge, one of the kind of concerns in the industry specifically is how effectively and easily they can implement such a program. And as I already mentioned, we're looking at about 500,000 of entities of all shapes and sizes. How can we support someone who wants to comply to this requirements easily without basically much disruption in their day-to-day life, without without additional burden from a cost perspective? So which is where we had proposed, and I'll kind of detail it a little later, a kind of a low-cost solution, a model which can be easily implemented using the current tools which they are already using. We already talked about a lot of them are basically using spreadsheets, maybe paper, to kind of maintain a lot of these documentation together. How they can continue doing that and be able to upload that information somewhere in the magic cloud and be able to comply to this regulation. So that's the first benefit, I would say, from our solution approach perspective, easily be able to comply to these regulation at a very low cost with not much disruption in their daily life to what they're currently doing. Now, there will be companies, and this is exactly what we have seen in other industries, including pharma. They first focus, like if the regulation comes in play, a lot of the companies' initial focus is how we can just comply. Yep. So that's first becomes their focus. And once they comply to the regulations, then they start looking at, now we have done something which we were not doing before, how we can get value out of that. Mm-hmm. And that's where they soon realize the amount of data and information now they suddenly have, which they previously was maybe still there, but hidden in the paper, in a thick rack of kind of paper or document somewhere hidden in their hard disk. Now it's very easily available to them, and they can then certainly realize a lot of value they can get out of that from an operational efficiency perspective, from reducing their risk overall, from the risk exposure perspective, not only about regulations, but say class action lawsuits from consumers, etc. From quick recalls perspective, and from consumer perspective, of course, we are talking about regulation, but one of the foundations on which at least we started our journey in this space was how we can basically enable consumer to have more information about the food they're consuming. And I'm pretty sure this information is very valuable. And once the company kind of starts having this information, they can get value out of it by providing that information to the consumer and differentiating themselves from others who are or basically good companies differentiating from the bad players. So in a nutshell, that's where what I see basically in the future happening from all this data, which is going to be getting kind of stored somewhere.
And this is where this, the traceability and transparency initiatives ties together ops, supply chain, the C-level with marketing and sales, right? So I don't, the number is something large, 85% of consumers, want to know where their food comes from. They're more loyal. They're willing to pay more. They're willing to switch brands, the whole ordeal. I think we've got another podcast on that gets the real numbers on those. I'm going to give you the old trust me that the data is out there to support doing things the right way is also good business. The reality is that I'm going to guess it's first mover advantage that, after everybody does this, you can't be like, hey, we're more transparent. Well, at that point in time, 60% of the people are going to be transparent or 70%. And it's hard to market that at that point in time or to differentiate yourself, but you want to be first. So companies like Patagonia or Gaia Herbs or, those type of supplements and food companies that have gone out and created sustainable food products and tell you where their sources are, they're winning, and they're getting, and what's the value of the PR they're getting is absolutely incredible. And so I think that's where, also going back to the ops side, the predictive analytics, hey, we've got, a graph that can show us which of our suppliers are delivering on time or not on time and when certificates are going to expire. And what does that do for you as a C-level to make decisions on who you want to spend more money and time with and who you don't, I think is huge, Mark, what do you see as, COVID has made things really interesting in the last year and a half. I don't know if you see anything with the timing of this. As far as I know, I don't think COVID has had a direct impact on our food. I know everybody was cleaning off boxes when they first came in our house. We didn't know what that meant, but we know we have a supply chain issue globally right now. You go buy things like tennis balls, suddenly they're not available or they're $10 a can. What do you see as the greatest risks to our food supply chain? How do you think this may or may not be able to impact some of those, whether it's a food safety risk or food provenance risks?
Yeah, from the standpoint of, I'll look at it two ways, right? First way is, when you say you look at COVID, you look at what's happened with supply chains. I go back to the level of, what happens at the level of calling food workers, frontline workers, and then we're dealing with a shortage of people, right? People are overworked, supply chains are strained, but let's just go to the level of actually producing the things and getting the things that we need. Is that, we have companies cutting production because they don't have enough people to work on lines. Right. And all of those things become stressors to the quality and safety of the food that you eat. Right. And you can try to automate. A lot of things have been automated. And I think that helps. Right. That helps manage the overall workload that you have and how many people you may need to do what to produce the same, cases, cartons of food that you made before. Right. But the strain that it's put on people at the work level, when you start lines back up and you've got inexperienced people, when you have sanitation crews that you can't find enough folks, all of those things now have become stressors at the base level of the food. When you can't bring containers of food products into the country that you need to have here, right? We talk about semiconductors and other things all the time, but there's shipments of food products that are affected by COVID. So from a supply chain standpoint, I think you see there's pressures both from the farthest levels of getting things into plants to be produced. There's been pressures on people within the plants to produce things. And to me, this is why leveraging at this point, what's available technologically to let this digital transformation help you manage these things, right? To trace the stuff that's going through when you don't have a person that's able just to, necessarily check every label, but because of the verification processes, because of, hey, we know what got shipped from point A, it's here at point B. We know the contents, we know the quality, and that information follows those products all the way through the supply chain. So to me, those are like the two things. One is just operational. The other actually deals with human beings and people themselves and the stresses they've been under that affect industry over the past 18 months.
You bring up a really good point that I probably don't think about or emphasize enough, which is anytime you bring on a new human or you're scaling and you're adding more complexity, and to have a system that says, this is what you're going to do, and this is the process. And the analogy I like to give is, when somebody's bowling a ball, you want those rails up so they don't throw it in the gutter. Yeah. So if you've got a human being shortage, and we've all staffing shortages are happening globally, certainly in the US, you bring on a new person, they can't order an ingredient from somebody who's not approved or hasn't gone through the proper process that can put your whole company and your reputation at risk. Those are things that can easily be missed. Yeah. Piggybacking on that, Manish, first of all, congratulations to you and to your team for being selected by the FDA for the traceability challenge is huge. So you guys have implemented blockchain as a component of your technology. How do you see blockchain being able to help with some of these risks and to mitigate that and to serve as an immutable digital ledger?
Thank you, Joe, for congratulating us. It has been a hard work, and of course, you have also been an integral part of it. Just a quick background about TagOne before I kind of jump into how blockchain can help, and how, in fact, I would also like to kind of explain our proposal because that is heavily dependent on the way we implemented this blockchain platform. So quick background about TagOne. We are a technology solutions provider company, 100% focused on supply chain traceability. We have been tackling traceability challenges for about 15 years across multiple industries like pharma, retail, supplements, hemp, CBD, and of course, food and beverage. And over the last few years, our single-minded focus has been to build a comprehensive cloud-based, easy-to-use traceability solution for the natural product industry that it can address any scenario, big or small, complex or straightforward. The TagOne traceability program results from that hard work, and the solution uses a unique role-based architecture so that it can seamlessly join together data and documents across the supply chain, giving us a detailed source-to-table traceability. This solution has two core tenets, and the first is, of course, the data is stored in an open source blockchain platform. So for someone who is not a geek like me, blockchain in simple terms is a platform which is designed in such a way that it makes it impossible to change, hack, or cheat the data once it is there in the system. This is what we term as the data immutability in blockchain, the term I think a lot of us would have heard many times. And there are many components to this architecture which enables that, but one of the ways it is achieved is having multiple instances of the databases, which are commonly called as nodes. So basically, we are accustomed to databases, and normally we see databases like one entity where all the data is stored. In a blockchain, you have many instances of the same databases replicated. So if you change one, you have to it can quickly come back to the original state because it continuously keeps pinging other databases to know if there is any difference and which one is the correct database. So that is one of the ways. There are other architecture things also which ensures immutability, like blocks, which I don't want to get into. Now, we have also heard a term called public and permission blockchain. One of the public blockchain, Bitcoin, I think we have heard so much. It's public because anyone can become a member and the data is basically visible to everyone. While in a permission blockchain, it basically means you need an access to get an entry into the blockchain. But one thing we need to understand that the permission is coming from the application level, in the sense the application is basically doing the verification and checking whether you have access to the data or not. But anyone who has access to the database, as I said, that there are multiple copies of the database. If anyone has the access to the database, that person and entity has full access to everything. So this is something which I think some of us forget when we think permission means that everything is safe and sound and no one has access to the database. But anyone who has access to the database will have the access to all the data. So how do we ensure security? Maybe because we are talking about end-to-end traceability from a supply chain perspective. One of the ways is we identify a body or an entity whom all the participants trust that they are going to keep the data secure, they're not going to leak the data, and they're going to ensure this access so that if someone is not authorized, they will not be able to have that access. If that body or that entity or that company is ensuring that, yes, everything is sounded good. Of course, that's one model which is there. Now, what we are proposing is an open source blockchain, which is a model a little different from that, because we think having one trust 500,000 entities in our supply chain, trusting one single entity is, I would say, very, very difficult. So ours is a decentralized network that basically give the control to the users to decide what to share and whom to share. So what we term as public data and private data. So public data is something which is basically accessible to public, which will be there in all the nodes. Private data is only kept in the node which the company has access to, and the company can even decide that that private node can be within their own four walls. It doesn't have to be in the cloud. We as TagOne can run it for them, or any other service provider can run it for them. But if they don't trust anyone, they can basically keep that private node within their four walls. And as I said, TagOne will run one or more nodes for our customers to store our customer data. And other beauty of our open source blockchain is any company, set of companies, or even our competitors can run their own node and be able to push the data. That's the concept of open source. It's not a closed blockchain. It's open for the industry to use. So we are basically ready to kind of design an architecture in such a way that others can also use that. The other tenet of our solution was how we can simplify this whole process of data capture and data upload, which is where we proposed Excel sheets, a simple Excel data sheets, which you can basically, the template you can download from our solution. And everyone is used to using Excel sheet. They continue filling up the data in those Excel sheet and periodically upload the data into the cloud from the regulation perspective. And we also have a mobile app for data capture. So these are the two easy ways for us to capture the data and push it to the blockchain.
Awesome.
So again, the reason we are proposing an open blockchain, just to summarize it, no one party controls the data, and have an open and transparent architecture.
Awesome. So Mark, we're running up against it now. I know you guys got to get back to your busy lives. Give us some parting thoughts about what you think about this whole tech traceability for the food industry, and maybe what your advice would be to a company who's starting to consider this.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, this is something that's going to be transformative for the food industry. We're moving past, a time when everything would be on paper to a time where everything is going to be digital. And I think, my advice to companies that are looking at this and saying, okay, what step do I take? Find a company to work with, or find a way to leverage your own internal capabilities, and data, figure out the data that you want to have transferred. And then find somebody who can help you get it to a point where it's usable for yourself and all of your customers, right? That's the main thing. Great description with the blockchain, but I just think that understanding that what you have, should be protected internally, but should also be able to be used in industry and follow your products along. Small companies can find good suppliers to help them do that.
Awesome. So I think we can all agree that, putting safety, food safety at the forefront, putting food provenance, letting people know that what is inside the packaging is what in fact is what's written on the package. And that this all starts with company values. And that means sometimes doing some things that seem to be hard up front, but in the long term, actually reap some significant benefits and reduce risk and reduce waste and give more visibility over time that make companies more sustainable, even beyond what their product is. It's not just a good thing to do, it's actually good business. Mark and Manish, I want to thank you guys so much for your time today and for you guys contributing your thoughts and wisdom. Appreciate everybody for joining us and listening today. And we will keep you guys up to date on what we see and hear with more updates from the FDA and some of the new technology companies that are emerging from this to make us better and stronger. So thanks again, guys. I appreciate it. And for everybody joining us, stay transparent.